Hello everybody. So right now we are going to go over animating inside of Blender. So right now I have this wonderful cube and I want to move it, rotate it, and scale it across my scene. So the first thing I'm going to note is that right now I am on the layout workspace, and if I pull this little menu up from down here, I'll see a timeline. And this is where my keyframes for movement, scale, and rotation are going to live once I add them. You'll also see that there's a very small little arrow right here. And if I press that, I will be able to bring up this menu right here, which will give me a catalog of all the keyframes that I've added. So let's actually go ahead and add a keyframe and talk about what that means. In the case of Blender 4.2.2, I'm going to press K, although on some earlier versions it should be I. I'm going to go down to Location, Rotation, and Scale, and I'm going to click this. Immediately inside of my summary, you'll see that there's a little yellow dot here. If I open this up, you'll see that there have been keyframes which have been added to my cube, and they have been added inside of the Object Transforms. If I open the Object Transforms, you'll see that there are 9 values here. 3 for the X, Y, and Z location of my object, 3 for the X, Y, and Z rotation of my object, and 3 for the X, Y, and Z scale of my object. Simultaneously, if you come over to the Object Properties menu over here, you'll see that all of these values right here have turned green. This is wonderful. This means that they've been successfully added to the timeline. But let's make this cube actually move. First, I'm going to select a point in the timeline that is not where I have added all of these points. The point is to be able to interpolate between two values, and so I need to put them at different points in the timeline in order to do that. So I've moved to 20 seconds, and all I need to do right now is move my cube. I'm going to press G, I'm pressing down on the mouse wheel to scroll it over here, and I'm going to press R and Y to be able to rotate it on the Y axis. Great. Now, if you look over in the Object Properties window, you'll see that there are a few values that are green, meaning that they've stayed the same since the last time we've added keyframes, and a few that are orange. Orange means that I've changed these values, but I actually haven't updated them and added them into the timeline. So how do I go and do that? Well, there's a few ways. The first way is I can just press K again, and I can add a keyframe for location, rotation, and scale. Great. Another thing that I can do, and I just pressed Command Z to go back from that. Another thing that I can do is I can hover my cursor over this and I can press I. And that will add the keyframes for that particular value. As you'll see, as I did that, I went from orange to green saying, hey, I successfully added that. So let's see what this looks like. Whoa, okay. We are cooking with gas right now. We have just interpolated between 2 points, and Blender has done in the rest to fill in the gaps. So this is great, but this might be a little cumbersome to animate in terms of going in, adding keyframes, going in, adding keyframes. And with Blender, there's always usually an easier way. So I'm going to go and move my cursor to a new location. And now I'm going to go and tick this on. This is the auto keying button. And it's wonderful, but it can also be a little tricky to use, specifically because anytime I move this object now, it is going to record those keyframes. So if I'm moving something else inside of my scene, it'll start to move those as if they were animated. So I just need to be somewhat cognizant about what I'm moving around here. So all I need to do now is actually move my mesh. I'm going to move it up. And hey, as soon as I moved it up, you saw the keyframes were added here. I'm going to move it on the Z axis. You'll see that a keyframe was added here, and I'm going to scale it up. And you'll see the keyframes are added here. Let's go ahead and play this whole thing. Great. This is looking really cool. Now, the next thing you might say to yourself is, Duncan, this is really great, but some of these motions, I'm going to go ahead and delete some keyframes right now to be able to illustrate a point. And I'm just going to say 0, 0, 0, 0. you might say, hey, Duncan, these movements are really great, but they're actually kind of a smoothing or a gradient that is making it a little challenging to get some of the animation effects that I want. Let's see exactly what I mean. I'm going to move this over to the side, and let's see what this looks like. See how it smooths into that place? It doesn't just abruptly end there. This will be good for certain things when we want a little bit of easing for our object. But sometimes, like say for instance, I wanted something to crash into something, or I wanted, maybe like a step. I don't want my step to ease into the floor. I want that step to end at an abrupt place. So I can change this in a few ways. The first way is I can right click on my timeline and I can go into interpolation mode, and I can just change this to a linear interpolation. That means that there is no easing. It just ends. You'll also see that there is no kind of like curve to the speed of this square. It is one constant speed. Another thing that I can do is I can go from the timeline editor all the way over to the graph editor. And you'll see, I can actually see exactly where that gradient lives right here. Now, a few things. This is another way of looking at keyframing my object. But what this does is it allows me to see the object speed at different points in that interpolation. Let's go ahead and make this menu a little bit smaller by pressing Control and Control and mouse wheel. Sorry about that. And then I will be able to kind of like see exactly what I want to see in order to edit this in the appropriate way. Right now, we have this kind of like gradient. I want this to be flat, so I'm actually going to take this handle right here. I'm going to press G, and I'm going to move it to make it more linear. Let's see what this looks like now. Great. And I can customize this in so many different ways. If I made this go a little bit further down, it's important to note that the value is over here and time is going across the x-axis. So value on the y-axis, time on the x-axis. Okay, great. That makes sense, right? It goes further below the point we're actually trying to reach, and then it comes back up in a snapping motion. Great. So I'm going to go back to timeline view right here, and it just views it as keyframes. The last thing I want to do right now is just demonstrate to you that any value inside of Blender I can actually animate. So while we just took a look at animating the cube and even using the graph editor to be able to get a very specific gradient, we've only really been doing object transforms on this cube. Let's go ahead and add something that's a little bit more novel. So I'm going to go over here. I have my cube selected. I'm going into shading. I have a material that is assigned to this cube. I'm going to go over into our render preview mode right here. I'm now going to press Shift A, and I'm going to bring a texture in. Right now I'm actually going to use the wave texture. You can use whatever you want. I'm going to bring this to color over here. You'll see that it gives me a wave pattern right here. And if I change this, it has an influence on the texture. But what if I want to animate this? Well, fortunately, all I need to do is hover my cursor over the value that I want to animate. But before that, let's go ahead and actually bring it to the point in the animation that has we want to bring it to the appropriate point in the timeline. I want to animate the distortion. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hover my cursor over this and press I. Great. Now all I need to do, because I'm in auto keyframing mode, is to actually just move the cursor to a different point and then change the value. And you'll see that it automatically turned green. It didn't have that transitionary period where it turned orange and then green. So let me go back to my object. Great. And let's see what this looks like now that we're animating it. Something else that's important to note is that I have a really long timeline right now, but I'm actually only working with the first 30 seconds, so I can actually change the end right over here. And there we go. I'm actually going to take off the transforms on this object right now. Just so that we can see the transform of this texture. Now the last thing I want to show you is that you can animate positions on the camera. So in this case, I'm in the animation workspace. You'll see that I can see exactly what my camera sees. And I want to be able to change this. So I'm going to go over to my camera right now. And I can animate this just like I would any mesh. In fact, if I wanted to animate the focal length, it would be pretty easy to do that. I can just follow the same protocols that I was using before. In this case, I'm going to go to the point in the timeline that I want to start adding my first keyframe. I'm going to press I over the focal length right here. You'll see that it is automatically added. And then all I need to do, because I am on auto keying mode, is to change this, and it automatically snaps there. If I was not on auto keying mode, I would need to change this. It does not get added, and then all I need to do is hover my cursor over and press I. And you'll see that it's immediately added. And whoa, look at this. I am getting some pretty interesting camera movements with very little work. So you can apply this to modifiers, you can apply this to arrays, you can apply this to light, you can apply this to color, you can apply this to everything inside of Blender. So go ahead, have some fun, and play with some animations. And in the next video, I'll be talking about how to render animations. And I'm also going to be talking about using empties. See you then.